Thank you for welcoming us, and thank you all for being here. This topic is so near and dear to my heart, your hearts, and so many throughout this room. So we are here to talk through how we can provide welcome to those that are most at risk. And so I'm just going to guide us through a conversation, and we really, look forward to hearing from you, from each of your unique perspectives and stories. So let's start with, what are the challenges? We are here to solve things. Folks have flown in from around the country to provide some opportunity to remind lawmakers that we want solutions, and so therefore we know we definitely have challenges. So let's start with a section kind of focused on where things are falling short. So for Sarah, let's begin with you. What are some of the, kind of broader challenges faced by resettlement agencies, PRM, the government, as these entities work to welcome and integrate those seeking protection to the U.S., including, of course, refugees, Afghan evacuees, Ukrainians, and then what are the things that loom on the horizon as well?
Thank you for the question. Can you all hear me?
Yes, there you're on.
It is such a pleasure to be here. I just want to say thank you for inviting me. I have long admired the work of the forum. So for us, from our perspective, from the U.S. government, together with our refugee partners across the country, I would say there were four primary challenges I would just highlight briefly, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the efforts we've taken to address them over the last almost 2 years. The first really striking challenge that I think most of you are probably familiar with is the fact that over the last several years, as refugee arrivals have plummeted, resettlement agencies had to close offices and lay off staff, and so at the start of the new administration, we had an extremely weakened system that had suffered and that we already had wanted to rebuild, but that was even before we knew that we would suddenly be receiving tens of thousands of Afghans in a matter of months in what became the largest resettlement effort in U.S. history last year. So for us, that put a lot of urgency in rebuilding, regenerating that network. Over 100 offices had closed, so we had to work quickly to stand them up and regain the sort of geographic footprint across the country. We are really pleased that last year we were able to support the new establishment of 72 new affiliate sites, and this year 29 more. So we are now back at 300 affiliate sites across the country, which brings us back to the level we were at in 2016. So that was an enormous challenge, and it's going to be a work in progress to keep building that piece. But alongside that, we had three other really challenging obstacles when we were trying to rapidly resettle refugees. The first being the national housing shortage, which of course is not unique to refugees and newcomers, but the fact that it exacerbated the existing challenge of quickly having to welcome tens of thousands of new arrivals and provide affordable housing for them that's safe for them. In fact, we even had to restrict placement in a number of communities such as Sacramento, Northern Virginia, Maryland, places that were at capacity unless they had close family who could provide housing. So we've been working with a consortium of organizations that would provide additional housing solutions and resources and technical assistance to resettlement agencies across the country, but it's again going to be a work in progress as the housing shortage has not abated. And then alongside that, there was a national staffing shortage, again, not unique to refugees and newcomers, but in particular, it exacerbated the challenge for us because there was a dearth of staff who had the requisite, cultural and linguistic and case management skills to support this population. So again, we worked really quickly to try to put new safeguards into place for our resettlement partners, new resources, capacity development, administrative funding. But again, there's only so much you can do when there is a national, shortage of workers who have these skills. So we anticipate that will continue to be a problem. And then alongside that, we also struggled with documentation, the documentation needed for work authorization and Social Security cards. The State Department worked really closely with DHS and the Social Security Administration to try to identify challenges in real time and unlock them, but it requires a lot of intensive work on the part of resettlement agencies to track all these documents and make sure they're coming in a timely way. So that's another challenge that will, I think, continue over the longer term, but I will just say that as a result of the enormity of the emergency response, it unlocked so much innovation within the U.S. government and across U.S. government agencies. I've never seen anything like it. and the way that we were able to lean into some of these challenges and coordinate really closely across the many agencies that are required to make this work. It gives me great hope that we are on much more stable footing and positioned to succeed over the longer term as our ambitious target remains for us and remains within reach, I think. So maybe I'll stop there and pass it back over.
I myself was on some of the bases and saw that quick action, so applaud that. Molly, over to you. What are some of the challenges that refugees, evacuees, others face as they seek to access employment for authorization and then stability, even with and stable status? And then what can businesses do to provide for them with the skills and opportunities they need?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jenny. And I'm going to echo a lot of what Sarah has said already, but so excited to be here. We consider the forum a great partner, and I'm hopeful to plug maybe some of your partnership later as well. But I think what we first have to acknowledge is that coming to the U.S. is incredibly difficult. As Sarah highlighted, newcomers are dealing with navigating a new healthcare system, learning about how to enroll their children in schooling. And all of this can often be done in a second language. So I think it's just best at the outset to acknowledge the uphill battle. I think then on top of that, some of the delays with the work authorization and sort of the Social Security numbers, as Sarah has mentioned, it's been really difficult. And what we've done on the Amazon side, and what we encourage other companies to do as well, is to really think about what is our corporate responsibility to support that program. And I can only speak for Amazon and sort of what we've done. But what I'll say is we're leaning in three main areas. The first is we're leaning in to provide access to employment opportunities, right? When newcomers are ready, we want to make sure that we empower them with those opportunities as they get on their feet. Second, we want to recommend that companies provide great pay and great benefits. And then thirdly, I think we're interested in looking at how we enable people with jobs, but also long-term careers, right? So maybe there is that first foothold into the U.S. employment system, but what does it look like to really set people up for success in the long run? And I can speak a little bit about what Amazon's done in those areas. So in terms of access of employment, we've created a refugee hiring guide, which we have partnered with our refugee resettlement partners, as well as provided it directly to newcomers, right? U.S. hiring is complicated, and Amazon's no different. So we want to make sure that our refugees are able to navigate that process, easily onboard, get help with interviewing tips. Once they have onboarded, we're proud to say at Amazon, we pay our hourly associates above $18 on average, right? We want to make sure that this is good pay on top of what we consider to be great benefits, which includes healthcare from day one. And then finally, we've leaned in with upskilling. We're particularly proud of a program called Career Choice, which provides our hourly associates with pre-funded college tuition money, as well as English as a second language training to any associate that's been with the company for over 90 days. I just want to share one quick success story. There's an employee named Shahid who works in our sort facility in Providence, Rhode Island. He left Afghanistan after the fall in Kabul, and now is employed as an associate, but is taking English as a second language with his local community college and plans to enter Career Choice in order to sort of set up that career, to gain that cloud computing knowledge. And he's actually interested in becoming a software development engineer. And at Amazon, we're particularly interested in supporting him and any newcomer like him with those entry jobs and then the additional training they might need.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Joseph, over to you. Please speak to us about the community directly. So many, Afghans are in limbo without a permanent status at the other side of what we have now. So can you speak about how the community feels and what are the challenges of that, of being on parole, and how does the community feel about, so far, Congress's inability to pass something that stabilizes their status?
Sure. Thanks, Jenny. I apologize, I'm losing my voice a little bit, but first, thanks for having us. And I come here today as a refugee myself. I was born in Afghanistan over 40 years ago. I was an asylee, and so a lot of what we're seeing is a replay, and potentially a very positive replay of experiences that we've had When I say we, I mean the 500,000 Afghans who are already in the US. In terms of the three main challenges and experiences, I think status is the biggest. Most of the Afghans who came here came on humanitarian parole, and so that's a temporary status, right? 1 to 2 years, and we're already a year into that. And so the biggest anxiety is what's going to happen to us now that we're here. People have their kids in school, people have great jobs at companies like Amazon and others, people have reestablished their professional certifications, and they're waiting to reunite with their families, and most of them want to know that's permanent. So the number one issue, it really is to make sure that the safety they've achieved is not temporary. The second issue, which you mentioned, is housing. Housing is the thing that we hear most about from the new arrivals. Again, a lot of them gravitate to where we already are. Those are places like Northern Virginia, California, Texas. These are not inexpensive places to live. So housing is a huge issue. And then third is really employment and enablement. And the private sector, I would say, our earlier panelists spoke about, is such a critical player in this space. It has been actually one of the biggest welcoming forces in this last year. And so most of what we hear on the third prong is people want to make sure not just to get a job, but a first job, and then get into a career. And so those three things are the most commonly talked about, but especially as time goes on, status is the biggest source of worry, anxiety, and distraction, frankly, for people who are trying to get their lives back on track.
Thank you. So let's deep dive now into the Afghan evacuation, talk that through. We've spoken more broadly. And let's start with you, Ozzie. You definitely, know this context well. So it has been over 1 year since the fall of Kabul. Take us back to the evacuation effort. What happened, who was evacuated, and how? And can you speak about the vetting process specifically used during the evacuation?
Thank you again for having me here. I appreciate it, and this is a really important issue to me personally, which is why I continue to stay involved in it. So a couple of things I want to highlight, because these issues kind of cloud the discussion about action and going forward where we are today. The first thing is there's a lot of focus when we talk about what are we going to do with this cohort of Afghans in the United States, is there's focus on the chaos of the evacuation. And the point there is, I don't know what, after 20 years in the country, a non-chaotic evacuation looks like. And some people have called comparisons to Vietnam tiresome. I would argue that there are similarities that need to be respected. You look back to Vietnam, where we were, evacuating people off of roofs of embassy and pushing helicopters into the ocean in order to get people out in time because Saigon was falling, similar to Kabul. So it was a very chaotic situation. There was never going to be a right way to evacuate Afghanistan. There absolutely just wasn't going to happen. And so in that effort, the U.S. government put in place, the best way it could to screen individuals coming on, prioritize them, do it quickly, and do it to get out. The second point I want to, which is to the point being asked, is we underestimate ourselves. Since September 11th, we have spent billions of dollars as a nation in our screening and vetting processes. And like I said, probably, who knows what the number is, but it's very, very large. It included standing up of the National Counterterrorism Center, multiple biometric databases, standing up the Department of Homeland Security. Massive amount of expenditures. So the idea that individuals that were just thrown on an airplane and came to the United States weren't screened or vetted is not accurate. The level at which they were vetted and screened is something that could be debated for sure. But when you're moving 80,000, 70,000 ended up to the United States in a very, very rapid manner, you have to be careful by saying they were not vetted coming into the United States. And then when they did come, they were vetted at some very rudimentary level at the airport. Then they moved to bases internationally, and some of military bases where they were screened there. Then they moved into the United States where they were screened again. So they all received some level of vetting. Some of the recent and the criticism should be considered, and isn't necessarily on the fact that they weren't vetted. It was along the fact from the IG report that a particular database wasn't applied to that cohort. That's a big mistake that shouldn't happen given the amount that we've invested in the country in the apparatus, but it did. But what I want to get to here is the important thing that we need to focus on going forward, and again gets lost in the argument about the chaos of evacuation and who was vetted, is at the end of the day, these individuals are in the United States. And now we need to do something about it. And so if you want to take, you can take the refugee approach and, we welcome to America approach. If you want to take the hardline national security approach, which a lot of members of Congress are taking, then doing something and putting like the AAA in place, like Senator Klobuchar talked about this morning, is a national security imperative. Because what you're saying by doing nothing is that I have a cohort of Afghans that are unvetted, that's their words, not mine, unvetted or improperly vetted, that have no standing in the United States beyond the next year and no plan to do anything with them. That is a counter-argument to the argument that you're making that this is a national security imperative. So part of any plan that you need to do to address the permanent status of these individuals has to include a security component, and it does, the AAA does include the most rigorous screening process that anyone that ever entered the United States would be subjected to. So I don't like that national security argument, because if you're going to use it, then you need to do something, because the status quo, in essence, would be a national security threat.
Thank you, Ozzie. Yeah. Sarah, over to you. How have the lessons from the evacuation impacted how the administration's thinking about and acting on the Ukrainian response and in response for others? And how is the administration thinking about parole alongside the refugee program?
Good questions. So as I was saying before, this response really did elicit just an enormous amount of innovation. The most significant policy innovation from my perspective that arose from the Afghan response was our work to quickly stand up a sponsorship program for Afghans. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's called the Sponsor Circle Program for Afghans. And it was launched as an emergency initiative in October of 2021, together with our partner, the Community Sponsorship Hub. And it was meant really to respond to two things. One was, as I was saying before, just the urgent need to rebuild capacity for this system so that it could welcome tens of thousands of people in a matter of months. And so to augment the existing resettlement system that we have with resettlement partners, we were looking to American communities to step up. So that leads to the second point, which is that we were just overwhelmed by the enormous outpouring of interest and support for welcoming Afghans in particular. It was a deluge of interest. And so we stood this up. It was an emergency initiative, but it stemmed from an original vision that the Biden administration had as enshrined in an executive order that was issued in the first few days of the administration to launch a private sponsorship program for all refugees. But we sort of piloted it in this instance for Afghans. We wound it down in September of this year to coincide with the closure of the last domestic safe haven in Leesburg, and as we pivot to launching this new program next month. So you'll be hearing more about that soon, and I'm happy to talk about that more. But essentially what it did was it enabled Americans across the country to raise their hand to welcome and directly support Afghans. And they did it in over 33 states across the country, welcoming 600 Afghans. Over 1,000 Americans joined into these groups to welcome Afghans. And it was a real cross-section of the American public. We had veterans groups and faith groups and refugee and diaspora groups, including Vietnamese Americans. They were among the first to step up and say, we know this experience, we know what this feels like, and we want to help, and we want to pay it forward. University groups, lots of organizations and individuals have stood up to support Afghans in just extraordinary ways. And so we're really excited to take that innovation and build it into this more permanent feature of the program that we will launch next month for refugees from all backgrounds. So that's one of the main innovations. And just quickly to your point, Jennie, about parole, I would just say, that the use of parole was an innovation that we've now, as you've seen, applied to Ukrainians. But just to say that parole is not meant to replace refugee resettlement through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. It was really meant to be an additional tool that we put in our humanitarian response toolbox. And they respond to different contexts. So for Afghans and then for Ukrainians, and in particular for Ukrainians, we knew that the urgent need was immediate and temporary, recognizing that for most individuals who needed immediate safety, they were women and girls who had left behind husbands, fathers, sons, brothers to fight in Ukraine, but would plan to go back eventually when it was safe to do so. And so we needed a tool that could be temporary and safe and immediate. That is not US RAP, which is not immediate. As some of you know, it takes quite some time to get through the US Refugee Admissions Program processes. So, and it comes with a permanent status, and that's obviously a key feature. So where possible, we try to bring individuals who are in need of protection through these third country pathways through US RAP, but we like to have additional tools for different contexts that enable us to bring people to safety as quickly as possible, but we remain just 100% committed to rebuilding and expanding US RAP for those who need it.
Thank you so much, yeah. Joseph, turning to you a little bit, with these folks here, no home to return to, focus just on the evacuation. What's one thing that you would say went really well for learnings, and then one thing that you would say, it'd be great if we improve this one item on behalf of the community, really?
Yeah, I might get some grief from the community for saying this, but I think it's honest. I actually think that the pace at which the evacuation happened, and it was stood up both in lily pads and in the US, was actually extraordinary. I think you'd be fooling yourself. You could have whatever criticisms about if it could be better, but it was extraordinary. Mm-hmm. So I think that mobilization was really critical, and I think it warrants some credit and recognition. The other thing, I'll mention two good things because I want to end on a positive note today, is how Americans stepped up. Mm-hmm. I mean, this has been a nonpartisan issue. Forget bipartisan, this is nonpartisan. We've had people across the political spectrum of every faith group, veterans, corporate America, the immigration lobby, national security folks. Everybody came together to welcome, which is also extraordinary. I think that the one shortfall is that it's not enough. There are hundreds of thousands of at-risk Afghans still in country. Specifically SIVs, people who are our most ardent allies, who we actually literally promised safety, right? So the one shortfall, the one learning is for us to really assess the value of the American handshake in our word. And that is an open question. I think a lot of Afghans are asking themselves that question. I think a lot of our allies are asking themselves that question. And it's one that I think the Biden administration and Congress still has an opportunity to answer better. But I think the volume of folks who still need help and to get out of the country is significant.
Thank you. Ozzie, right on the heels of that, I'd love for you to add to that, because I know you share those thoughts. There's lots of folks left behind. What can and should be done? What should the U.S. do for those who were not evacuated?
We need to continue to keep lines open for those individuals that do want to leave Afghanistan to come to the United States, because there are a lot of people that are left behind in there, and there are people, we don't know how the situation is going to turn out and what the Taliban are going to do in the next 5 to 10 years. And right now it's relatively quiet. We're not hearing a lot, but we don't know how that's going to change, and we have to be prepared for that. Every individual in Afghanistan, I wouldn't say every, but most of the individuals in Afghanistan had to make a decision when the United States was there, with their interaction, whether they were a vendor on the street selling to someone that was an international American or a Brit or wherever, to the people that actually served with the individuals in the field, in the military or the diplomatic corps, how to make a decision that I'm going to turn my back on the Taliban and I'm going to support democracy, the United States, the international community. That decision was explicit. Almost all the time, and when you leave that, but when you put your cards in that on that table over there, you now are leaving yourself vulnerable to the influence and to the brutality that is the Taliban, and will always be the Taliban, no matter what they say or what they do. They are patient. They will buy time. They know that they have won in their own way. And they just need to wait, they need time and space. And so we need to be able to not forget about Afghanistan like we did 40 years ago. And we need to remain engaged to the greatest extent possible. And we need to continue to give those individuals that do want to leave Afghanistan a pathway out of Afghanistan and away from the brutality of the Taliban.
Moving into our final comments, I want to give everyone a chance to kind of bring us home on this. And Sarah, why don't I turn to you and ask that you share just a moment on the new program coming out and why you're hopeful and things that we need to hear about it.
I would be thrilled to. We're super excited about this. And I think what you just heard is the strong rationale for why we are very eager to get this program off the ground. And it really, it's meant to sort of achieve 3 goals. The first, as I said before, is to build the capacity. But the second really draws on what my colleague was just saying about what American communities have been bringing to refugee resettlement. There is no substitute for communities who have always been the backbone of refugee resettlement historically throughout the history of our 40-year program. The networks and the resources and the energy and the assets that local communities bring, and the friendship. Refugees need friends too. And that extends beyond the services that we can provide through the government. And in particular, at the State Department, our services are just for the first 90 days. And we know that the need exists well beyond that. And so having the care of local communities to welcome refugees is really critical. And we believe it will also improve refugee integration outcomes. So we're really excited about that. But also over time, we're excited about the way that it will help introduce Americans more broadly to the idea of refugee protection, why we resettle refugees, why this program's so vital, and hopefully build broad-based support for it over the longer term, because this program is really sort of the heart of American foreign policy. So we're really excited about it. It will launch next month. We've already partnered with a consortium that will help stand up the infrastructure to help recruit and train and support sponsor groups and match them with newcomers. And eventually, next year, we're going to introduce a component to it whereby communities of care in the United States can identify refugees overseas that they want to refer to US RAP and then support here. So veterans can identify individuals that they served alongside, or church groups, or LGBTQI individuals, or religious minorities can identify those from their communities that they want to bring and support through the resettlement program. So this is the most significant change to the resettlement program that we have had since its inception, and we're really excited about it and know that it will help tap into just the incredible energy and ability of Americans to directly welcome and support refugees, together with the private sector, which I have to say has been completely indispensable in the Afghan response. We've been really just delighted to see the way that CEOs and companies have stepped up, and it's something that we want to replicate. Now we have proof of concept. We know that this can work, and so we're just thrilled to be able to break it wide open and make it available for refugees from all nationalities as we work to rebuild the program. So hopefully you'll be seeing more about this in your communities as you leave here and go back to your local communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And for Molly and Ozzie, if I could put your last two comments together from each of your unique perspectives, from the business community and from the veteran and national security communities. Why do each of these groups feel that it's very important that we continue to welcome, and you know, kind of what is that last note you want to leave us with about the importance? Molly, would you go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So much of what the panelists said has really resonated, you know, with me today and sort of aligned with Amazon's vision. And I think at Amazon, we think this is a global problem and it needs a global solution. And as a corporation, we're ready to step up to the plate. So in terms of, you know, how we think about it, I think the biggest thing is, and obviously I'm an Amazon person, so we're always citing numbers and datas, and it just makes business sense, right? There are studies that show that refugees have longer tenure than non-refugee in comparable roles. So we want to make sure we focus on that, focus on the vitality, the diversity of thought, and really how we can support them within the Amazon community, but within the larger community as a whole.
Thank you.
I think there's two things. One is idealistic and one is pragmatic. The idealism behind the veterans, I would say, the ones that are supportive of this issue, is that you know, we made a promise, we made a commitment, which is very important to us in the war of the uniform. And we did it for a long period of time, for 20 years. You had individuals, not me, but my peers, with multiple rotations who served in Afghanistan pretty consistently over 20 years. That means you met someone when they were 22, when you left Afghanistan when they were 42. And you got them to buy into a set of ideals, and you know, and when you were there, you were like, not only am I going to, you know, stamp out al-Qaeda and protect the United States, but maybe, your efforts could help, girls and women in Taliban get educated and live a different life than better otherwise. And so to pick up and leave that commitment behind, you have a very visceral reaction as a veteran, because you feel like you have broken your commitment, and everything that you served for the last 24 years really didn't have any meaning, or had less meaning than you thought that it did. It's a really, really hard thing for a veteran to get their heads around, and the mission's not over. Because if the last 20 years, everything that we did, we stamped out al-Qaeda for the most part, but then you left them behind, and we're to go back to the way it was in 2000, is unnerving. The second issue is a practical issue, is that we rely, whether it's diplomatic corps, the intelligence community, the military community, every day in our overseas missions, we rely on our partnerships overseas and our handshake, and asking them for help, and asking them to work with us to achieve our national security objectives, international security objectives. And if they can't trust an American, they can't believe in an American, then our whole national security, our foreign service, the whole apparatus can start to crack. It'll be less effective. They've got to believe when Americans are overseas working out of their embassies or working with our military cohorts, that they can believe and that they're making an investment that's going to be beneficial to them and to their nation. And we can't undermine that by turning our back on our Afghan allies.
Thank you. It's a great last word. And I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for this constructive conversation on this very important, robust program.